Imagine you wake up one day and see stuff like this: ducharse, lavarse, despertarse, hablarse, verse. You think, wait a second, I've been learning Spanish for a day and a half and I've already mastered these peasant level verbs, but what is this se attached to the end? Hello. Today we're going to talk about the third type of se in Spanish, and it's reflexive se. Luckily, reflexive se is a part of reflexive verbs in general, so if you know how reflexive verbs work, you already know what reflexive se is. If not, this video is for you. The concept of reflexive verbs may be confusing at first, especially if Spanish is your first Romance language, but it'll get easier, I promise. By definition, reflexive verbs are the verbs where the subject does some action and the action is reflected back to the subject, meaning that the subject performs an action on itself. So it is a mirror, basically, meaning that if I look at the mirror, I see myself. If she looks at the mirror, she sees herself, and if we look at the mirror, we see ourselves. If that doesn't make any sense, just give me a sec. One of the most popular use cases for reflexive verbs is anything that has to do with personal care or daily routines, such as waking up, showering, washing your hands, or brushing your hair or teeth, for example. Even though we don't think about it very much, we actually have the same structure in English. For example, you can say, I shower or I shower myself. He washes his hands, they wake up, or they wake themselves up. Sometimes we use words such as myself, himself, herself, ourselves to indicate the reflexiveness of the sentence, but sometimes it's not always necessary, so we just skip them. In Spanish, though, it's much more important not to forget to include all this myself, himself stuff, or you're gonna be called gringo until the rest of your life. Now let's look at the verbs from the beginning of the video again. We have the verb duchar, to shower, lavar, to wash, despertar, to wake up, ver, to see. Simple, yet sometimes these verbs may take another form, which is expressed by adding a reflexive pronoun se to the end, which basically adds the word oneself to the whole structure. What it does is it brings a mirror in front of you and it says that whatever comes out of your mouth next will be reflected back to you. It means that the action you are about to perform is gonna happen to you and only you. This oneself part will be manifested by using the correct reflexive pronoun. One thing to keep in mind is that adding se to the end of the infinitive verb form is just an official way to show that the verb is reflexive. Meaning that when it comes to actually using it, you will have to use a different reflexive pronoun in order to match the subject that does the action. I'll explain. Let's take the verbs despertarse, lavarse, and sentirse, for example. So we have me despierto, te despiertas, se despierta, nos despertamos, se despiertan. Me lavo, te lavas, se lava, nos lavamos, se lavan. Me siento, te sientes, se siente, nos sentimos, se sienten. You'll have to remember which pronoun is associated with which subject, but I promise you it'll take you a day or two top, because you'll be using this stuff every single day. It is that important. Another thing to notice here is that we use the pronoun se for both él, ella, usted and ellos, ellas forms. No, it's not a typo. That's what we call reflexive se, and that's what this video is actually about. I understand this is confusing, because like I said, we add se to the official default verb forms like despertarse, lavarse, sentirse, to indicate that they can be reflexive. And I know I said that each subject gets to have its own pronoun, such as me, te, nos, but one of these pronouns happens to be se. Again, I know it's weird and confusing, but next week you won't even think about it. Now let's talk about the placement of these reflexive pronouns. When we have only one verb in a sentence, we can only put the reflexive pronouns before the verb. For example, mañana me despertaré a las 8 de la mañana. Ella se lava las manos cada día. Ellos se sienten mejor. But if we have two verbs that go one after another and the reflexive verbs happens to be the second verb in a chain of the verbs, we have more flexibility. For example, mañana me voy a despertar a las 8 de la mañana, or mañana voy a despertarme a las 8 de la mañana. Ella se va a lavar las manos, or ella va a lavarse las manos. Here the verbs despertarse, lavarse, and sentirse are used in an infinitive form after the conjugated verb ir, to go. That means that we have two choices here. Either to place a reflexive pronoun before the first conjugated verb, ir in this case, or to attach a reflexive pronoun to the end of the reflexive verb itself, which is much easier, obviously. But it's important to understand that both versions are absolutely acceptable and correct, and it's a good thing to be able to recognize both of them. Again, it's not a big deal because you'll be seeing both of these structures every day. Another example of this is when we are using progressive or continuous verb forms. It's when we say estoy duchándome, which means I am showering, instead of me ducho, which means I shower. Just like with the examples before, we have me estoy duchando or estoy duchándome. Ella se está lavando las manos ahora or ella está lavándose las manos ahora. Nos estamos duchando or estamos duchándonos. Simple, right? Now, all of you probably have one question. Why the hell do I need to do all this shit for? Why can't I just say yo lavo mis manos instead of me lavo las manos? And also, does it mean that I can't use these verbs without the reflexive pronouns me, te, se, nos before or after them? No worries, those are absolutely valid questions. Now, let's take a simple example of lavar versus lavarse. First things first is that yes, both options are acceptable. Yo lavo mis manos and me lavo las manos. The main difference is that the first option is for gringos who only play Duolingo once a month and expect groundbreaking results. And the second is for people who actually want to immerse themselves in the language and get a spicy señorita as a result. Now listen closely. All you need to worry about is whether the subject is performing an action on itself or on someone or something else. That's the key difference. Remember the mirror analogy. So when I want to say I wash my hands, I realize that my hands are a part of me, or dare I say myself. So that means that I should prioritize lavarse instead of lavar. On the other hand, let's say you want to wash your dog or a car. The dog is not a part of you or yourself. Even though the dog belongs to you, it is a completely separate entity. So there is nothing reflexive here going on, which means you can say lavo mi perro cada día. Lavará su carro la próxima semana. Same can be said about waking up, for example. Me despierto means I wake up or I wake myself up, to be more specific. Meanwhile, despierto a mi hermano los lunes means I wake my brother up every Monday. See the difference? Having said that, when it comes to the daily routine or personal care, it is more or less logical, I would say. But as always, there are exceptions, meaning that there are plenty of verbs that are used mostly in reflexive form, regardless of who the receiver of the action is. Unfortunately, those verbs will have to be memorized. The video is getting too long, so please let me know if you want me to cover the specific examples of these reflexive verbs in a separate video. Other than that, I hope the concept of reflexive verbs makes more sense to you now. If you have any more questions or video requests, don't be a dingus and let me know down in the comments below area.